I've heard people say, oh, my ambulatory site struggles to crack 5% margins. And then I've heard other organizations say, like, oh, I'm in the ballpark of 30%. That's a big difference there. So there's a lot of slack in the system for organizations to get a lot better with ambulatory.
From Advisory Board, we're bringing you a radio advisory, your weekly download on how to untangle healthcare's most pressing challenges. My name is Rachel Woods. You can call me Ray. Earlier this year, we released an episode on how leaders can modernize their ambulatory strategy. It's all about getting out of our past hyperfixation on building up sites and assets and into an era that's focused on ambulatory capabilities. And that's actually a big mindset shift. Frankly, it's a shift away from thinking of ambulatory as merely a means to funnel inpatient volumes. For one system, that might mean focusing on longitudinal preventative care. For another, it might mean convenient or accessible care, or maybe integrated specialty care, low-cost procedural care, and more. Regardless of the posture that you take, the ambulatory network that you envision also needs to operate as efficiently as possible. It actually needs to make money on behalf of the enterprise. And honestly, that's the hard part. To talk about operating the ambulatory network of the future, I've brought advisory board experts Nick Hula and Lauren Woodrow. Hey, Nick. Hey, Lauren. Welcome to Radio Advisory.
Hey, Ray.
Thanks for having us.
I should say welcome back. It wasn't that long ago that we were talking about ambulatory. And dare I say, it's even more important in September than it was when we talked about this just a few months ago in February. When we first started tracking the rise of ambulatory sites and networks, and when I say we, I mean advisory board, it was frankly in direct response to consumer demand. And it's been well over a decade since we first started tracking the emergence of ambulatory sites. Here's my question. Have years of effort resulted in a healthcare ecosystem that is indeed keeping up with consumer expectations?
Broadly, no, Ray. At least not health systems, and not right now. I don't think it's that anyone has made bad strategies or bad decisions over the past decade. But I think health systems have designed their organizations to succeed in the current healthcare environment.
Yes.
And 10 years ago, that was probably, hey, we need things like hub and spoke.
Yes.
Right? We need to funnel patients from ambulatory sites to our hospital for profitable stays. And that worked. That was really good. That worked back then. But that's not where we are today. Organizations are lagging behind is in adapting their ambulatory strategies for new demand of 2025.
And to be a true strategy, right? Maybe we were successful in ambulatory sites, right? Getting the right physical thing in place, feeding the inpatient beast, but not necessarily an ambulatory strategy, certainly not the ambulatory strategy of 2025. And I have to admit, I had a feeling that you would say that despite all of the effort, the delivery system is just not keeping up with patient and consumer expectations. Is that the only area where you see ambulatory strategy falling behind?
Yeah, I think strategy is one half of it, right? Yeah. We do see organizations falling behind, not having ambulatory strategies for 2025. The other area is operations. Falling behind on operating ambulatory sites effectively. And there are organizations who do this well. But again, I think it's where health systems who, through no fault of their own, have been focused on operating hospitals for a really, really long time. It's not a core competency of them. And they're just starting to realize we can't copy and paste a playbook for the same service in a hospital and just pop that into an ambulatory site and expect it to run well.
We're not off to a good start here, Nick.
No, we are not.
If ambulatory strategy is not meeting consumer or, frankly, business expectations, that is certainly not a place that any business leader wants to be in 2025. But I'm curious, Lauren, from your perspective, why is it so important to run a successful ambulatory business, given all of the pressures in healthcare business today?
I think it all comes back to that sort of short-term margin pressure. Systems actually cannot afford to miss out on the revenue that generate from their ambulatory business. There's fierce competition for outpatient volumes. Every other purchaser, every other major healthcare player wants to steer care to the ambulatory sites.
Yes. They don't want to steer members or employees to high-cost hospitals.
No. And payers, employers are dealing with their own margin pressures, which is prompting them to place an even more concentrated push to lower their costs.
Hmm. That was the short term. What about longer term? I have been talking about growth of ambulatory networks for too long, too long. In fact, I'm not even going to give away how long I've been talking to health leaders about ambulatory. Skeptics listening to this conversation might be thinking this big promise of ambulatory volumes, of money coming from ambulatory networks, didn't really happen, or I didn't feel it, not in my balance sheet. What do you say to that pushback?
I think it's a fair feeling because for so long, this has felt like this shift is happening somewhere in the near future, but it's not happening in the future. It's happening now. We're seeing that the outpatient shift is continuing, and we're seeing evidence of that with site neutral payment reforms, the elimination of the inpatient only list. There's just a bigger amount of increased policy and regulatory pressure. There's economic uncertainty. So it's more important than ever to position your business for success.
I love that point, Lauren, about this isn't a future problem. This is a today problem. You listed out a lot of policy factors that are pushing these set of care shifts into today. It's also things like the innovation landscape, clinical, technological innovation. It's patient preferences. Payers are exacerbated with these cost pressures. They might dial it up. It's also competition, right?
Yeah.
Organizations that don't look to where the puck is headed with these set of care shifts might fall behind competitors who are. Look at things like joint replacement, right? That's been a very high profile shift from hospitals to ambulatory surgery centers. And we saw organizations that didn't start to invest in ASCs for joint replacement. A lot of them have lost their outpatient market share for that service altogether as others have taken that spot.
Right. Can we talk about the balance sheet issue specifically?
Absolutely.
Most margin in healthcare actually comes from the outpatient space.
From the outpatient space, that surprises me a little bit, at least when I hear about the sentiment of I can't afford to invest in ambulatory or an outpatient because I'm going to lose money there. Are you saying that sentiment is wrong?
Yeah, I think it's easy to look at your primary care, for example, and say primary care isn't making my organization money. It's a loss leader. But actually, you should be thinking about your outpatient sites and your outpatient capabilities sort of in
Yeah.
the aggregate and thinking about
Mm.
how is it helping your overall health system rather than how much money is this one specific site making me.
So this is what I'm hearing. Reasons to invest in ambulatory. First of all, it's actually making you a lot of money, even if your accounting practices might be hiding just how much your outpatient network is feeding your enterprise-wide margin. There are also all of these pressures that are growing now. The outpatient shift is continuing, more pressure from policy on site neutrality, on eliminating the inpatient only list, pushing further into value-based payment. I want to double click on policy because I've also heard folks go in the opposite direction and say, because of the margin pressure, the economic pressure, the pressure for tariffs that I'm under right now, thinking about the last conversation we had, Nick, they're saying, I actually need to pause. I can't afford to build now because the cost of building has gone up. There's tariff volatility, et cetera. Is that a reasonable response?
I think it's a totally fair response that we're hearing from a lot of organizations, but there are two things I would challenge leaders on when they come up with that. First is what Lauren just said. If you are having to
Mm,
be very targeted with your investments, hey, if a lot of your margin, most of your margin is coming from the outpatient side, a lot of times that is where your business is. And that might be the area where we do have to make investments for long term sustainability. The second thing I always point out there is you use a key word there, Ray, of build.
yeah.
What we encourage people to think about with ambulatory is in what ways can you get better and
Hmm.
expand capacity, expand access to ambulatory by getting better, not necessarily getting bigger by building and buying.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that building the ambulatory network of the future may not actually require building at all?
You will always need a place to deliver care, so there will always be reasons to build, but there will
Sure.
also always be reasons why you can't. Our point when it comes to your ambulatory network is that building shouldn't be the default action.
Yes.
There are
Okay.
creative solutions that can help fix efficiency problems without sort of that huge capital and time investment that building requires. And so that good efficiency for the enterprise includes ambulatory efficiency.
So then what does good ambulatory efficiency look like?
I think it means expanding your ambulatory capabilities, which, if any of you all listened to our episode from back in February, we talked a lot about our capabilities. It means expanding those or offering new ambulatory capabilities with your existing infrastructure.
Hmm. Can you give me an example of what getting better before bigger looks like practically?
Yeah, there are a ton of ways we found in our research. The good news, I'll go through a couple, but the good news is none of these are foreign to
Mhm.
anybody. They are all tried and true tactics that organizations have used in the past. It's just these need to be the first place people turn when they think, I need to add ambulatory, as opposed to the knee jerk reaction of building new sites. So it includes things like improving operational efficiency. Hey,
Mhm.
instead of adding more primary care sites, can we just improve scheduling with what we already have?
Yeah, improve
Right?
the capacity that you already have. Absolutely.
Exactly. It's care team. I don't just mean like clinicians, physicians, nurses, but are there non-clinical support staff that we can add in smart ways? It's telehealth. It's repurposing planned investments. Like, hey, we were originally
Mhm.
trying to go towards X service in this site, but our market changed, so we need to adapt, and it needs to serve a different purpose.
And Nick, actually, on that note, one organization that we spoke with noticed that they were getting a lot of specialty care visits, but a lot of those patients didn't have a PCP.
Hmm.
So they decided to co-locate primary and specialty care offices. They already knew patients were willing to travel to that location. And then if
Mm.
patients said that they didn't have a PCP, they could essentially walk them across the hall and schedule a primary care appointment.
Which also, by the way, feeds the broader enterprise. And that's honestly the underlying theme that I'm hearing here. When we used to talk about ambulatory, it felt very separate. It was like, what do you do with this entity and how do you make the most of it? But there's an underlying theme that I'm getting from the two of you, which is that actually focusing on ambulatory has to take an enterprise wide approach. Even if you think about the accounting, how you're thinking about how you're feeding your enterprise, how you're thinking about efficiency is not just inpatient efficiency, it's the whole network.
Right. And again, it's not just those sites feeding the hospital, but it's those sites all feeding each other. So in the example Lauren just shared, that's specialty care feeding PCP, right? Or it
Yes.
can be urgent care feeding imaging center volumes. It's almost like a web of sorts of all these different sites benefiting all the other types of sites or care settings within the organization.
Which is exactly why, and this was the big insight that you shared with us in February, Nick, that the right ambulatory strategy focuses on capabilities and not sites. It's not widgets, it's not
Right.
things, it's capabilities, right?
Right.
To Lauren's point, you are still going to have to build. Focus on efficiencies first, focus on the enterprise first, but at some point you actually do need to get bigger. So, how should leaders focus on smart growth when it comes to physical expansion?
Like we just talked about, smart growth requires getting better before bigger, which includes maximizing your existing footprint. But smart growth, when you do need to build, requires staying flexible and nimble
Hmm.
so that you can adapt to changing market needs.
For example, changing tariff policy.
Exactly. Changing tariff policy or even like looking at an individual market. Right. One organization who we spoke to, they were building some sites to meet their community's needs, but a major manufacturer said, "Hey, we're building a plant in your market now." And they're going to add
Hmm.
tens of thousands of people to that market that were going to need a very different service than what they were building for.
And all of a sudden, a new opportunity that you hadn't planned for.
Right, exactly. So what they did was, hey, as opposed to expanding more and more and more, hey, to these sites that we already are building, let's figure out if we can add a different service to that. In this case, it was primary care. They needed a ton more primary care. So they just added primary care to the sites that they were already building, shuffled some things around without needing to do a ton more new growth.
Yeah.
Yep. Another form of flexibility, which is sort of an opposite example to the one that Nick just shared, is maintaining an off ramp.
Yeah.
So these sort of breakpoints in the building process allow you to reflect on what we've learned, but then also allow you to pivot due to external factors like real estate changes, new legislation, changing market needs.
Yep.
That off-ramp allows you to sort of take a step back and say, hey, is this still the best course of action for our organization?
Meaning, would we pause, stop, divest? Is that what you mean by off-ramp?
Exactly. That off-ramp sort of allows you to get out. But stopping building doesn't just mean stopping investment in ambulatory growth. It just means changing your focus and maybe putting more emphasis on operations over those new sites.
We'll be right back with more Radio Advisory after this short break.
Healthcare payment models are evolving fast. Are you keeping up? In a new Q&A from Advisory Board, sponsored by Optum Financial, experts break down how leading systems are modernizing payment delivery to improve access, affordability, and outcomes. Learn what's working, what's next, and how your organization can stay ahead. Read the full conversation by clicking the link in this episode's show notes.
There's a $100 billion national cost savings opportunity in reducing unwarranted care variation, but executives haven't yet committed to care variation reduction at the system level. Join experts from Advisory Board and Optum for a new webinar on October 30th at 1 p.m. Eastern to learn 5 reasons executives hesitate to address care variation across their systems and highlight the financial, operational, and strategic upsides of pursuing it at scale. Visit advisory.com/webinars to register for this session and more.
You're listening to Radio Advisory. I'm Ray Woods. I love that you're pushing back on this idea that health leaders tend to default to certain practices, defaulting to inpatient first, defaulting to building and adding more sites. There's another default, which is defaulting to consumer preferences. And I want to be careful here. I'm not saying that consumer preferences are not important, but they are far from the only factor here. You both rattled off a bunch of them. You talked about the importance of employers and purchasers. You talked about the importance of policy. I want to talk about clinicians, because they have strong preferences too. You can have the best ambulatory network that has all the capabilities that you need, that's strategically aligned to the vision of the organization and as efficient as possible. And that network is only going to make you money if clinicians are actually sending their patients there. And we know that clinicians can be incredibly loyal. I might even use the word rigid to their referral pathways.
Ray, what you're describing is site attachment. If clinicians are attached to specific sites, then the health system is attached to specific sites. What causes this for clinicians is it could be as simple as they don't have any interactions with people at other sites. It could be that each site has its own way of doing things, its own processes. And part of it is that every group of physicians has their own unique culture. Don't get me wrong, autonomy is important for clinicians, and you have to respect that.
Absolutely.
But in order to have a strong ambulatory network, that autonomy has to be balanced with the system's need for efficiency, consistency, and actual systemness, which requires breaking clinicians' attachment to sites.
And how do you do that?
Yeah, 2 sides to this: operations and culture.
Yeah.
You have to make it easy for clinicians to do what you want them to do, meaning you have to streamline the referral process, create shared DHR and technology platforms.
That's got to be a big part of better before bigger, right?
Yes, absolutely. You have to make it easier for clinicians to refer in-network.
And if you want to hear more about referrals, we actually just re-released one of our top episodes from last year that was all about maximizing referrals and not missing out on the quite literally millions of dollars on the table.
The other thing, in addition to operations, is culture. You have to establish a system-centric culture that helps clinicians understand the system capabilities, generate buy-in for system goals, which all comes back to that ambulatory vision conversation you had back in February. And one example here is an organization that we spoke with created recurring engagement events that had a dedicated budget so that clinicians could interact across sites. And these events helped clinicians see the bigger picture. It humanized the ambulatory strategy. And we heard anecdotally that these events actually helped retention rates.
And this is a long time best practice when it comes to physician and clinician engagement, which, to your point, benefits the whole enterprise, the whole system. Back to that big theme I was talking about is make sure they understand the team that they are working for, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's a hard part of all of this, especially that culture piece. You can have the best strategy, the best operations for your clinicians to follow. If the culture's not there, they're not going to do it.
And just like we were saying that leaders need to take the operations and the efficiency seriously, you have to take this culture building piece seriously too. This is not an ice cream social. This is not a pizza party, because there is a lot of money on the table from referrals. And that's why I love this idea that building the ambulatory network of the future starts with maximizing what you already have.
Right.
But I have to imagine that health systems are not going to be good at everything. That's where we started this conversation. We started this conversation saying that the traditional delivery system hadn't kept up with expectations for access or affordability for anyone. Knowing that systems aren't going to be good at everything, at least not today, and we don't have another decade to let them develop all of the ambulatory capabilities they need, what should leaders do?
They need to look at partners, Ray. It comes back to those operators that I mentioned earlier in the conversation. A lot of times, these operators, they have been doing this for decades and have dozens, sometimes hundreds of sites, and they can do ambulatory a lot better right now than health systems can as they just start to dip their toes into these waters.
But these are the people who you said at the beginning of this conversation, as part of an urgency lever, are your competitors. The independent ASC operators that are a machine at doing, say, hip and knee replacements.
Right.
We're saying not just competitors, maybe partner.
Right.
Is that right?
Exactly. And that's because it might be worth partnering with these organizations. As a health system, sure, you get less equity from those ventures, but a lot of times health systems are not experts at providing that type of care, which is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of health system leaders. I've heard for a lot of health system leaders, they've been caring for their communities for, generations and generations. But it comes a time when you need to accept, like, hey, do I really know how to run an ASC? Do I really know how to do combined freestanding emergency room urgent care sites? Do I know how to do freestanding infusion centers well? If the answer is yes to that, congrats, go forth, conquer. But a lot of times I'd wager that answer is going to be no, because that's a new frontier for them. And a lot of times that might mean they need to partner for the first couple ventures, potentially with someone who's your competitor, in order to the next handful of times you do it, you can do that alone. You know how to run those sites well.
So the partnership doesn't have to be forever. It means learn now so that you can catch up. But if you're pursuing something like a joint venture, partnership doesn't mean marriage in this case.
Exactly. That's correct.
Nick, earlier this year, you came on Radio Advisory to talk about the mindset shift that is the backbone of best-in-class ambulatory strategy, right? It's a shift that requires making ambulatory as strategically important as inpatient. And I listened back to that episode before we sat down to record this one. And you told me at the time that the way you know that an organization has elevated ambulatory to the strategic importance of the enterprise is that you can see it. You can see it in the reporting structure, in the budget, in the vision, and you can see it in the data. The open question leaders need to answer is how to measure the performance of ambulatory services. Lauren, you said at the beginning of this conversation that outpatient care makes up more than half of health system margin today. And that is very different than the prevailing perspective. The idea that ambulatory is a loss leader, it loses money, right? Which we already talked about is mostly a result of accounting practices, like only considering direct revenue from the individual asset, which I know now is a big no-no. What is the right data-driven perspective to have here?
Yeah, there are two big things I'd share there, Ray. First is it better to get 50 cents on the dollar or no cents on the dollar, right? Ambulatory volumes and revenues are going to increase over time. That is where we see the most growth in healthcare.
Yes.
Organizations that cling to that very inpatient business model completely in the names of maximizing revenue, I think might be risky. right?
Yeah.
You risk losing market share for certain services over competitors who go into that space. So it's a mindset shift away from how do we maintain current course and speed with how we define financial success for our organization as long as possible to how do we succeed on a different course that accounts for ambulatory.
Hmm.
The second thing I would share there is I hear a lot of people saying ambulatory is a loss leader.
Yes, exactly.
Is ambulatory a loss, or does it need to be a loss leader though? Because like ambulatory can make money.
Yeah. There's a reason why there's so much competition because someone has figured out how to make money.
Right. I've heard people say, oh, my ambulatory site struggles to crack 5% margins. And then I've heard other organizations say, like, oh, I'm in the ballpark of 30%.
Wow.
That's a big difference there. So there's a lot of slack in the system for organizations to get a lot better with ambulatory. And we said that from a physical footprint and capacity perspective, but also from an operational perspective too. There's a lot of slack for health systems, for other organizations to be operating their ambulatory sites more effectively, more efficiently to make money.
I will sum this up with something I mentioned earlier, which is focus on aggregate margin. What margin is generated by the system as a whole rather than one single hospital ambulatory site? And then consider how much each asset contributes to system level success, not just how much a single site is making.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how you get value of operating and running a whole enterprise.
Exactly.
Well, Nick, Lauren, thank you for coming on Radio Advisory.
Thanks for having us again.
Look, if I'm honest, the healthcare industry operates with a lot of inertia. We're slow to change and we're slow to transform. And I can't think of a better example of that than the decades of work in ambulatory sites, but not necessarily in ambulatory strategy. It's time for us to actually pick up the pace. There's only going to be more pressure on health system margin and on outpatient shift. So you might as well start working on this now. There's plenty more to learn, and we'll add some more links to the show notes. Because remember, as always, we're here to help. Next week on Radio Advisory, we're going to give you the headline takeaways on the biggest trends impacting oncology, cardiovascular care, women's health, and neurology service lines. We're going to cover some of the universal challenges facing specialties and how service lines are managing patient access, workforce, policy, and clinical innovation. New episodes drop every Tuesday. If you like Radio Advisory, please share it with your networks. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave a rating and a review. Radio Advisory is a production of Advisory Board. This episode was produced by me, Ray Woods, as well as Abby Burns, Chloe Baxt, and Atticus Rosh. The episode was edited by Katie Anderson, with technical support provided by Joe Schramm, Chris Phelps, and Dan Tyag. Additional support was provided by Leanne Elston and Aaron Collins. We'll see you next week. Okay, my brain is broken.